The suitcase was brown leather, scuffed at the corners even before the bombs began to fall. It belonged to Elias's grandfather, a man who had traveled for pleasure, not escape. Now, as the sirens wailed across the fractured skyline of Ethelgard, it was all Elias had. The rule was simple, brutal, and non-negotiable: 1 bag per person. In his bedroom, amidst the dust shaken loose by distant impacts, Elias faced the impossible arithmetic of loss. How do you quantify a life into 20 kilo? He packed a woolen coat, 3 pairs of socks, and his identity papers, the flimsy bureaucracy that proved he existed. Then came the agonizing choices. He bypassed the photo albums, too heavy. He left behind his books, his records, the porcelain teacup from his mother's cabinet. Instead, he reached under his bed and pulled out an oiled canvas roll. Inside were his grandfather's leather-working tools, a bone folder smoothed by decades of use, a curved awl with a rosewood handle, a small brass hammer, and a selection of heavy-gauge needles. They were heavy, impractical, and utterly essential. They were his heritage. Finally, he placed a small, tarnished silver locket in a side pocket. It held the only remaining picture of his wife, Sarah, lost in the first week of the conflict. He closed the clasps. They snapped shut with a sound like a final gavel. He didn't look back as he walked out the door. The journey was a blur of grey water, crowded train cars smelling of unwashed bodies and fear, and endless, freezing queues at borders drawn by men who didn't care if they lived or died. Through it all, the suitcase was his anchor. On the leaking fishing boat across the strait, he sat on it to keep above the bilge water. In the refugee camps, it was his pillow, the hard leather pressing against his ear, whispering reminders of who he once was. When thieves prowled the tent cities at night, he slept with his arms wrapped around it like a lover. It contained not just his tools, but his dignity. He arrived in the city of Oakhaven with nothing but the clothes he wore and the suitcase gripped in a hand, cramped permanently into a claw. Oakhaven was a sprawling, industrial beast of a city, perpetually damp and indifferent to newcomers. Elias found a room in a tenement cellar that smelled of mildew and cabbage. The rent took the last of the meager government handout. The room was so small that if he lay down, his feet touched the opposite wall. There was no furniture. On the first night, he set the suitcase in the center of the concrete floor. He sat on it and ate a cold tin of beans. It was his chair. By night, it was his strongbox. By day, it was the only thing in the room that wasn't gray. Survival was the first empire he had to build. He worked 12-hour shifts washing dishes in a greasy diner, his hands raw from harsh chemicals. He swept the floors of factories where machines roared louder than the bombs back home. He was exhausted, hollowed out, a ghost hauling meat around the city. The tools stayed hidden in the canvas roll for 6 months. The turning point didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like another failure. His cheap, donated belt snapped while he was unloading crates at the docks. His trousers slipped, and the foreman laughed, docking his pay for the disruption. That night, shivering in his cellar room, Elias was consumed by a cold rage. He was a master craftsman of Ethelgard, and he couldn't even keep his own trousers up. He dragged the suitcase into the sliver of moonlight filtering through the street-level grate. He opened it. The smell, the rich, deep scent of old leather and metal hit him harder than any memory. He unwrapped the tools. They gleamed in the weak light. He didn't have leather. But on his way home, he had found a discarded, oil-stained welder's apron in an alley. He cut a strip from the cleaner's section. He used the bone folder to crease the edges, the awl to punch precise holes. He threaded a needle with wax twine he'd scavenged. His hands, clumsy from months of brute labor, remembered the rhythm. Push, pull, tighten. The stitch he used was the Ethelgard double lock, a technique virtually unknown outside his homeland, designed to outlast the person wearing it. He finished the belt as the sun rose. It was ugly, stained with engine grease, but it was indestructible. Wearing it the next day felt different. It was a secret armor. A week later, a fellow dishwasher noticed the belt. "Where'd you get that tough-looking thing?" he asked in broken English. "I made it," Elias said quietly. "Can you fix my boot?" The sole is flapping like a dead fish. Elias fixed the boot that night, using a scrap of rubber tire and his grandfather's brass hammer. He He charged the man the price of 2 loaves of bread. Word spread through the tenement underground. The quiet refugee in the cellar could fix anything made of hide or canvas. Soon the suitcase wasn't just a chair. It was a workbench. By candlelight, Elias repaired torn satchels for messengers, reinforced knee pads for construction workers, and restitched the worn handbags of cleaning ladies. He stopped washing dishes. The smell of grease was replaced by the smell of beeswax and tannin. Every penny he earned went into the suitcase. He ate less, slept less, worked more. He scavenged quality materials wherever he could find them, discarded luxury sofas, old saddles from the police stables. 2 years after arriving, Elias walked out of the cellar for the last time. He carried the suitcase to a tiny boarded-up storefront in the garment district. The sign above the door, hand-painted by Elias himself, read simply, E. Thorne & Co. The Co. was aspirational. It was just him and the suitcase. His break came when a limousine broke down outside his shop. A well-dressed woman paced impatiently while her chauffeur fumbled with the engine. She noticed the bag in Elias's window, a sleek messenger bag he had crafted from reclaimed saddle leather, featuring the distinct double-lock stitch. She bought it on the spot. 3 days later, she returned and ordered 5 customized travel totes for her husband's corporate retreat. The quality of Elias's work was undeniable. It carried the weight of history and the desperation of survival in every seam. It was durable, functional, and starkly beautiful in a city of cheap imports. E. Thorne & Co. grew. The tiny storefront expanded into the building next door, then the warehouse behind it. The solitary candlelight was replaced by humming fluorescent lights over rows of benches where 20 artisans, many refugees themselves, worked under Elias's exacting eye. 30 years later, the headquarters of Thorne Worldwide stood 70 stories above the Oakhaven skyline, a glittering needle of glass and steel. Thorne leather goods were carried by presidents, movie stars, and titans of industry. They were symbols of ultimate luxury, renowned for an unconditional lifetime guarantee. Elias Thorne, now an old man with silver hair and hands still calloused despite his billions, stood in his penthouse office. The view was spectacular, the city lights spread out like a conquered galaxy. A young journalist sat opposite him, notepad ready. They were doing a profile on the titan of tannin, the refugee billionaire. "Mr. Thorne," the journalist asked, gesturing to the opulent surroundings, "you have achieved everything. You built an empire from absolutely nothing. What is the secret?" Elias smiled, a tired, gentle shifting of lines around his eyes. "Not from nothing," he corrected softly. "I had everything I needed." He stood up and walked past the Italian marble desk, past the shelves filled with industry awards. In the center of the vast, minimalist office, sitting on a simple wooden pedestal under a dedicated spotlight, sat an object that looked entirely out of place. It was a brown leather suitcase, scuffed at the corners, its brass clasps tarnished by time and salt water. "I never unpack it," Elias whispered, resting his hand on the worn lid. "Why not?" the journalist asked, sensing the story. Elias tapped the leather, a hollow, resonant sound. "Because an empire's heavy, young man, but the things that truly matter, the tools to rebuild when it all burns down, the memories of what you lost and the will to survive." He looked out the window at the sprawling city he had once entered as a ghost. "Those things only weigh 20 kilos.